Good morning, class. How are you guys all today? Good, I hope. Today we're going to be learning about the Boston Tea Party. So let me give you a second to go look in your notebooks for what we wrote down about what we thought we knew about the Boston Tea Party and what we wanted to know about the Boston Tea Party from last week. I'll give you a second to do that. Right. So the Boston Tea Party. To start was the French and Indian War, otherwise known as the 7-Year War. This war started in 1756 and lasted 1763. And while the name may make it sound like it is a war between the French and the Native Americans of the time, it was actually a war between the British and French. And I'll get more into that in the next slide. But as you can see from this image, it depicts the British redcoats fighting with Native Americans who are most likely on the side of the French at the time. Right. So the British wanted to expand more eastward from their 13 original colonies this way, but the French controlled most of the land up in Canada up here, who wanted to expand southward. This led to them meeting and both wanting to expand into the Native American reserves, which were right here. And while they both could not occupy the same land, they started in battle and war. Some of the natives sided with the French, who thought that would be more beneficial to them, while others sided with the British, who thought they could better be allies. The British won this war, so French gave up control of the area south of Canada to the British, while right in this area. The war was mostly fought for the area around this Ohio River Valley. So after the war was won in 1763 by the British Parliament, or the British government, created a Royal Proclamation of 1763. This created this red line here that you may see. This said that the colonists could not cross this line because they were unable to protect them or develop the new lands at that moment in time. Also, a result of this war was massive debt from the British. Debt and tax. So the colonists were not allowed to travel westward from the new lands won in the war with France. And like I said, this was because the British could not afford to protect them from other Native American attacks or develop the new lands because of all the debt they have accumulated from the wars. So to make up for this debt, the British Parliament made 3 new sources of income for themselves. The first was the Sugar Act of 1764. Next was the Stamp Act of 1765. And lastly of the 3 was the Townshend Act of 1766. First, the Sugar Acts placed taxes on all sugar products coming over to America from the British. While this actually lowered taxes on these sugary products, it placed greater regulations on smuggled goods. While smuggled goods may not sound like a good thing, these were actually just all the other items bought from other areas other than British. The British wanted to be the only supplier of goods to the Americas, while the colonists knew they could buy it cheaper elsewhere. Next was the Stamp Act. This act was around for a couple years before it was later repealed due to protests and boycotts. This tax was on all paper products. So all paper documents needed stampage, which was bought from the British. So, for example, if you wanted to turn in an assignment and I were like British Parliament, I would require like an ink stamp on it to know that it is official. So out of your pocket, you would pay me 1 cent for each time you wanted to turn in an assignment, which the colonists thought was completely unfair. Lastly, the Townshend Act. This taxed all new imports to America, such as glass, paint, paper, lead, and many other daily objects. Again, the colonists thought all of these taxes were unfair because they needed these to survive, and they did not believe that the British over in Great Britain were getting the same taxes placed on them. So each of these acts was followed by a great deal of protests and boycotts. The colonists believed the taxes were not fair. One colonist named James Otis said, "No taxation without representation." So this basically means that the colonists did not believe they should be taxed from the British government if they were not receiving representation in British Parliament, which they were not. So this resulted in the Boston Massacre. Why don't you take a second to write down what you may think this was all about? All right, so the Boston Massacre of 1770, 5 colonists were killed following a boycott of taxes from the British, leading to greater public distress. So 5 colonists were killed. They were unarmed, protesting one of these acts that taxed them more and made life generally much harder on them. So when the crowd got maybe too out of control, the Boston government shot them, and then this led to great unrest. So I have a short video. It's a little goofy, but it shows how the colonists at the time felt about these taxes and how British officials felt about them too.
Sheet of every one of my newspapers, there's going to be a half-penny revenue stamp printed on the front. That half-penny comes out of my pocket.
Well, I mean, I suppose there is some unrest. There's concern over duties that are required to pay off the debt of the 7 Years' War. But we must pay those duties. We're all loyal subjects to the Crown.
The Crown has established this without giving us any recourse.
These papers are small concerns, madam, not large businesses. And so once a tax like that is imposed on me, that I have to pay in hard currency.
Well, there seems to be a lack of understanding of what it is to be a loyal subject to the Crown. We all are that, and yet some don't want to act in that manner.
Mr. Ellery, they are protecting our interests by impressing our sailors, perhaps?
By stopping our trade and making sure that no ship is dare enter our harbor.
By increasing all of our costs 20%
of the tax. We have to work our way through that.
All right, so that's just a short bit of the video, basically saying that the British government thought that the taxes were fair because it was helping them to get out of the debt from the war, which would eventually help the colonists. But the colonists did not see them as fair because they were just harming them and costing them more money, while those in Great Britain were not paying their fair share. This led to the Boston Tea Party on December 16, 1773. This is a result from years of tyranny of the British Parliament. Colonists were enraged by new tea taxes. So, like the other acts we've read about prior, these taxed all the tea coming in to America. So they began to throw the tea shipments from the British into the harbor. It was estimated 340 chests of tea were thrown overboard. And since tea was the preferred drink of the colonists, they were thought to drink over 1 million pounds of this a year. Now take a second and write down what you may notice from this picture. pause if you need to. One of the things that stands out to me is how the people on board the ships are dressed as Native Americans. While these are not actual Native Americans, some of the colonists dressed up as this so they could be disguised, per se, so that any British officials who were there may not recognize them as easily. Naturally, this upset British Parliament, so they enacted the Coercive Acts, or known as the Intolerable Act, to the colonists. The first was mass government. This act limited colonial power and reinstated royal government. So this basically gave them the ability to outlaw town meetings and elected positions. So it gives more power to the British Parliament oversee while limiting the colonial power. Next was the Quartering Act. This allowed British military leaders to house soldiers in private homes and buildings without permission from the colonists. Next was the Quebec Act. This designated the western part of the Ohio River Valley as Quebec and Roman Catholic controlled. This upset many of the colonists because they were Protestants. Lastly, there was the Boston Port Bill, which closed the port of Boston, effectively eliminating commerce and trade within the city. All regularly traded items and goods must have been bought through Great Britain instead of anywhere else like before. Lastly, the Administration of Justice Act. This allowed change of location to Great Britain or other British colonies in the event of jury trial in the colonies. So if someone was on trial in, say, Boston, British Parliament had the power to say, no, we are going to do your trial in Great Britain with a jury who are not of your peers, but of people from around Great Britain. So it was less fair for the colonists. All of these led up to the Revolutionary War of 1775 to 1783. So now I want you to write down some of the stuff you learned about from this presentation of the Boston Tea Party, and then what you think you know about the Revolutionary War and what you want to learn about the Revolutionary War. And we will get into this next week. Thank you.